I stared down my vengeful ex-partner in the cold glare of the boardroom, every heartbeat echoing the raw betrayal of a shattered alliance, as I unveiled the deception that poisoned our once unbreakable bond. With one desperate, irreversible gesture, I exposed the truth that would dismantle our entire empire, a choice I can never unmake. Chapter 1: Gathering Storm. The rain tapped against the office window as Janine pored over the company's financial ledgers. In the late evening glow of her desk lamp, Janine was determined to uncover the truth behind the perplexing transactions. A sum seemed too generous for routine expenses, sparking a sinking feeling in her gut. "This isn't just a mistake," she murmured, memories of past deceptions mingling with distrust. Her thoughts were interrupted by a text from Eric, stirring a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. Once partners in business and love, their story ended in betrayal. Yet his name reignited feelings she'd tried to extinguish. The message read, "We need to talk. I'll be in your office tomorrow." A bitter smile crossed her lips as she recalled shared dreams turned chaotic. Eric's return could complicate matters or help unlock the deceit she was unearthing. She typed a terse reply, emotions boiling beneath the surface, her hunger for truth clashing with lingering hope for reconciliation. The office, now charged with tension, confirmed that the upcoming presentation, designed to expose financial malfeasance, was fast approaching. Janine was preparing to reveal secrets that threatened the company. Eric's reemergence challenged her control over her ambitions and vulnerabilities. Reviewing her presentation, the dissonance between data and emotion grew. Every chart whispered of betrayal. Her determination belied inner doubts. She reminded herself that the quest for truth was entangled with painful recollections of love turned sour. Glancing at a faded photograph of her and Eric, irony wasn't lost on her. "I must keep my head clear," she whispered, steeling herself against nostalgia. The office door creaked open, and Janine tensed as Eric's silhouette appeared. "I know what you've been digging into," he said, his tone a mix of caution and unresolved passion. His presence reminded her of their shared history and challenged her mission. "Janine, it's not just numbers you're dealing with. Things run deeper, things that hurt and can destroy." His words were both a plea and a warning, linking their personal history to the corporate betrayal she faced. Their conversation lingered in the charged air, every unspoken word throbbing with potential consequences. The clock ticked as they both knew tomorrow's presentation would be a reckoning. Janine's eyes locked with Eric's, daring him to challenge her professionally and emotionally while maintaining her focus on the truth. As the storm outside raged, Janine realized every element of her life was under siege. The storm wasn't just in the skies. It was in the boardrooms, ledgers, and the space between two souls who once believed in love. She wondered if she was prepared to sacrifice her heart for justice, or if old passions would capsize her resolve. Chapter 2: Hidden Betrayals. In the cool silence of her office after hours, Elena sat at her desk, surrounded by a sea of documents and digital files. The steady hum of the computer seemed to echo the mounting tension in her heart. Tonight was not for sleep, but for uncovering the labyrinth of financial missteps that had puzzled her for weeks. Her eyes roamed over blurred spreadsheets and cryptic transactional records, until a series of mismatched figures began to paint a damning picture, a deliberate siphoning of funds from their joint ventures. Every anomaly chipped away at the mask of trust she had once comfortably worn. With each careful step deeper into the intricate web of numbers, an unbidden memory flickered into her consciousness, the laughter, the whispered dreams of a shared future with Damon, her former partner whose ideals and ambitions had once perfectly aligned with her own. That warmth, now spiked with bitterness, gave way to uneasy doubt. What had really transpired between them? As she cross-referenced the data against emails and meeting notes, snippets of the past invaded her thoughts. One minute, she was poring over financial ledgers. The next, she was lost in a flashback of a time when meetings between them felt charged with creativity rather than conquest. The memory of Damon's easy smile during late nights spent strategizing, his firm yet gentle hand on her shoulder, and an almost prophetic curiosity about the future of the company flooded her mind. Was it possible that behind the facade of a once passionate team leader, he had booby-trapped their partnership with deceit? Elena's hands trembled slightly as she printed out a thick dossier of evidence. The details were unmistakable: unauthorized transfers, secret shell companies, and offshore accounts that pointed squarely at a betrayal that cut deeply into both her personal and professional realms. Every detail was a sting of betrayal, ripping at the fabric of trust they had so painstakingly woven together. And yet, in the quiet corners of her mind, an echo of his charm persisted, muddling her sense of right and wrong. She remembered Damon's promised whispers, his assurances that every risk was a step toward greatness. But now, those words resonated with hollow irony. The deeper Elena delved, the more she graphed the timeline of deceit that spanned months, a meticulously orchestrated ruse that saw funds being diverted under the pretense of legitimate business expansions. The documents, once thought to be a pathway to growth, were now a chronicle of two-faced intentions. She recalled that day when Damon had confidently walked into the boardroom, his eyes alight with vision, assuring their investors of a brighter tomorrow. Only now did she realize that his brilliant facade concealed a mind that had been calculating in the dark. Her internal conflict intensified as personal memories clashed with professional duty. In the solitude of that experiment of truth, Elena's mind replayed quieter, more intimate moments between them. Late-night confessions over wine, promises made beneath the soft glow of streetlights after a long project's victory, and a kiss that had once sealed her heart. Those moments were now tainted by the revelation of betrayal. Was it all part of a carefully spun tapestry of lies, or simply a victim of circumstances driven by ambition gone awry? The juxtaposition was unbearable. On one hand, the evidence screamed of deception, a cold arithmetic of betrayal. On the other, her heart, battered by nostalgia, fought against the rational fury, clinging stubbornly to the remnants of a past where love and loyalty intertwined. Memories of Damon's laughter during brainstorming sessions, the mutual respect they once shared, and even the comforting presence of his support in times of personal crisis all coalesced into a blur of conflicting emotions. How could one person embody both the honest partner of her past and the mastermind behind this corporate subterfuge? The late hour weighed heavily as she compiled her findings, her mind a battleground of ethical duty and painful reminiscence. Each piece of evidence was like a heartbeat in the silence, insistently reminding her of the cost of truth. She annotated the documents meticulously and hesitated before saving the final file. There was something reminiscent in every detail, a whisper of a future that once had promise. Yet the numbers were uncompromising, and the contradictions between Damon's charming assurances and the cold reality of the ledger left her teetering on the edge of despair. It was in that moment of quiet desperation that Elena realized the true depth of her inner turmoil. She was caught in a precarious balance between the legacy of a love that was once profound and the duty to preserve the integrity of the company that had been her dream. This was not merely about financial discrepancies. It was about the slow, inexorable erosion of trust and the painful recalibration of her life's principles. Standing up from her desk, Elena looked out the window at the cityscape, a mosaic of light and shadow much like her own existence now. There was no simple way to reconcile the heart's tender affection for a man who once loved her with the stark, unforgiving reality of betrayal. With a deep exhale, she acknowledged that the next steps would be fraught with peril. The decision to shine light on Damon's deception was already made. The coming days would force her to confront not only the shattered remnants of a business partnership, but the unhealed scars of a love betrayed. In the solitude of that late hour, the war between passion and duty had only just begun. Chapter 3: The Boardroom Showdown. The boardroom was already charged with an atmosphere of expectancy when Elena stepped up to the podium. The long mahogany table, usually a symbol of power in calm negotiations, seemed to compress around every word that she was about to utter. Today, however, every eye was focused on her, and behind them, the shadow of a toxic past loomed. With a steady voice, Elena began laying out the damning evidence of fraud, a story of deceit interwoven with data, internal memos, and digital footprints that could not be ignored. The screens behind her flickered to life, showcasing a timeline of dubious transactions and correspondences that spoke of a betrayal too deep to be swept under the rug. As she outlined the painstaking details, murmurs fluttered across the room. Investors, board members, and colleagues exchanged anxious glances. Amidst this scrutiny, her gaze locked with that of her ex, Damien. Once, their history was filled with promises and unspoken dreams. Now, his eyes burned with a conflation of anger and wounded pride. Standing at the far end of the table, Damien's features tightened into a mask of disbelief as he challenged what Elena was exposing. "This is preposterous," he declared, a tremor in his voice that betrayed both his fury and inner turmoil. "You're twisting the truth to tarnish our reputation." There was a split second of silence, a pregnant pause where the boardroom felt as though it were holding its breath. Elena's response came not just in the form of facts, but in the raw emotion that had simmered under years of betrayal. "The truth isn't a matter of perspective, Damien, it's a matter of fact," she countered, her voice rising with a mixture of indignation and despair. The presentation continued like a relentless tide washing away the old deceit, each slide cementing the evidence of fraudulent transactions and unethical decisions. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clicked to a slide that held the final piece, a digital ledger entry with unmistakable markers of deception. Damien's eyes darted to the screen, and the anger there shifted unpredictably into something darker. His objections grew vehement, not just against the evidence, but against every word Elena had spoken and every secret they had once shared. It wasn't just the scandal at stake, it was the crumbling illusion of a relationship built on both ambition and hidden resentments. The board members watched, caught in the crossfire of professional duty and personal vendetta. Before anyone could intervene, the tension in the room transcended measured debate. In a moment that seemed to suspend time, Damien advanced from his seat and closed the gap between them. His voice dropped to a knowing whisper, sharp and painful. "You always thought you were so righteous tonight. Let's see if you can stand by that truth without burning everything else you've ever cared about." The words, a blend of challenge and unspoken longing, wrapped their way around the charged air. In that volatile instant, as each confronted the parts of themselves that they had buried away, the scars of old wounds, the remnants of intimacy, the unthinkable happened. Their heated indignation gave way to a maelstrom of conflicting emotions that blurred all rational boundaries. In the midst of thunderous accusations laced with pain and the need for vindication, Damien's hands reached out. Before either could fully process what was happening, their lips met in a kiss that was as fierce as it was desperate. It was a collision of passion and hostility, a moment when love and revenge tangled in one heartbeat, leaving both of them trembling in vulnerability. The kiss was brief enough to shock even themselves, yet weighty enough that every second afterwards stretched into a chasm of emotions too complex to articulate. The public display of intimacy and raw, unfiltered emotion sent ripples of disbelief across the room. Board members exchanged furtive glances, while some scribbled notes that hinted at further consequences. The once cold boardroom was now an arena of passion and treachery, where personal vendettas were merged with corporate accountability. With the undeniable evidence glaring on the screen and the echo of that charged kiss hanging in the air, it became clear that the toxic partnership was beyond salvage. The board was left with no choice but to dissolve the alliance. The fraudulent dealings would no longer be concealed under layers of deceit and personal charades. As the room erupted into controlled chaos, voices rising in hurried conversation, papers shuffling, and the distant hum of inevitable corporate retribution, Elena felt a tumult of emotions churn within her. The kiss had been a momentary lapse, a stark reminder of a past steeped in both passion and pain. It was an emblem of everything unspoken between them and a testament to the profound complexities of their shared history. In that charged moment, the distinction between love and vengeance had been obliterated, leaving only raw vulnerability and the painful acknowledgement that sometimes the closest bonds are also the most destructive. With the board's decision imminent, and the churning aftermath of this showdown settling in, Elena's heart pounded with a mix of relief, regret, and a newfound resolve. The dissolution of the once powerful, now toxic partnership was just the beginning of a painful introspective journey, a journey defined by the courage to embrace the truth, no matter how bittersweet its revelations might be. Chapter 4. Aftermath and Reckoning. The morning after the exposure felt like waking from a nightmare into a harsher reality. The once secure headquarters now resonated with whispers and restless murmurs. In the aftermath of the public fallout, every corridor and boardroom breathed defeat. The company, once a symbol of order and promise, was now a landscape scoured by revelations of deep-seated corruption. It was here, amid shattered confidence and crumbling alliances, that she stood, her heart a maelstrom of anger, regret, and a cold clarity of betrayal. Her business partnership, the bond she thought unbreakable, had been irrevocably dissolved. The fraudulent machinations that had run like dark currents through every decision were now undeniable. Colleagues who once promised loyalty now pointed fingers and whispered accusations in hushed tones. The board meeting that had devolved into chaos, with executives trading heated glances and calling for accountability, left her feeling exposed yet strangely liberated from the weight of deceit. Every word that spilled from her lips in that room felt like a confession of failure. As shaking hands were shaken off and deals were abruptly undone, the structure of her world was collapsing, riveted to the truth of her own involvement. In the quiet corners of her mind, the emotional fallout was equally relentless. The choices she made, the decisions taken under pressure, and the subtle manipulations meant to sustain power, now presented themselves in sharp relief. She retreated into a solitary space, time seeming to stretch in the isolation of her once comforting office. Here, she allowed the pain to seep in unabated, the cold sting of betrayal intermingled with a profound sense of responsibility. It was in these moments of solitude that the ghosts of her past choices began to speak, urging her to confront not only her professional missteps, but also the tender wounds inflicted by a man she had once loved. His name was Julian, a presence that had once promised trust and companionship. Now, however, his actions resonated with the bitterness of vengeance. His betrayal cut deeper because it was inflicted by one who once shared her dreams and her vulnerabilities. The memories of their whispered secrets, late-night promises, and the palpable pulse of love seemed tainted by betrayal. Julian's calculated actions, his subtle maneuvers to exacerbate the damage after the scandal, had left an indelible mark on her soul. Every text, every unexpected visit at the edge of her exhaustion, amplified her internal discord. He was not just a relic of her painful past, but a living reminder that trust once broken would always linger like an unhealed wound. Outside the concrete walls of the company, life had begun to reflect the external chaos. Once righteous critics in the media now painted the entire institution with the same brush of corruption. The news was unrelenting, every headline a merciless reminder of what had been lost. Each news cycle, each editorial, forced her to wrestle with the duality of her existence. It wasn't merely a fight against corrupt practices, it was an insistent internal debate about the person she had become and the ideals she had long since abandoned. At times, the mirror in her apartment was a cruel confidant, reflecting her fractured image alongside the haunting shadow of a man whose love had turned vengeful. In the days that followed, the fallout became an unceasing tide. Friends and allies receded from her life as the public controversy grew. The personal cost of professional ambition became palpable in the empty spaces of her former relationships. Yet, in that barren void, the seeds of introspection began to sprout. With each passing hour, the immediate sting of outrage melded with a quieter, more insistent urge for reconciliation. A painful reckoning that demanded she reclaim the parts of herself that had been lost in the pursuit of success and control. Late one night, as rain pelted the windows of her small, now solitary apartment, she found herself flipping through old photographs, letters, and mementos. In these relics, she encountered moments of tenderness and hope, moments that had been overshadowed by greed and deception. These flashbacks were bittersweet, a reminder of who she once was, and a signpost pointing to who she might yet become if she learned to forgive herself. The realization grew painfully clear. The work of reckoning was not solely about facing an external enemy, but about accepting the inner chaos and the scars born of her mistakes. Julian's vengeful echoes, the unrelenting judgment of the public, and the fracturing of a once sturdy alliance had all forced her into a confrontation with an inescapable truth. Yet redemption might be found in that confrontation. The road ahead was uncertain. Her aching heart braced for the inevitable collision of past wounds and the possibility of a new beginning. As dawn approached, a fragile resolve began to settle in her chest. The days of hiding behind corporate facades and shadowed desires were over. It was time to face both the ruins of corruption and the remnants of a love defiled. In this crucible of agony and clarity, she prepared to step into the next phase of her life, a journey that would demand her to own every mistake and salvage every shred of dignity left behind. The reckoning had just begun, punctuated by the promise that, even in the midst of betrayal and devastating fallout, a new future, though uncharted and raw, lay waiting to be forged. Chapter 5: Truth, Redemption, and Love Reclaimed. In the soft, uncertain light of early evening, the air was heavy with expectation. The place where they had once promised a future together now served as the backdrop for truths long concealed. The protagonist, standing at the threshold of a memory-heavy doorway, braced herself for the confrontation that had been building silently over time. Across from her, her ex-partner, whose presence was as familiar as it was fraught, hesitated momentarily before stepping forward. The palpable tension was a mixture of anticipation and regret, a promise of renewal and a history of undeniable hurt. Their eyes met, and in that shared silence lay the weight of unspoken pain. Without a word, the ex-partner began, his voice quivering with vulnerability. "I've been haunted by what I did, the times I chose pride over understanding, silence over truth. I see now I hurt you more than I ever intended." His confession cut through the layers of past resentment. For years she had carried the scars of those decisions, each mark a testament to the battles she fought silently within herself. Here, at this moment, his admission was both an apology and an earnest step toward accountability. Her initial reaction was a mixture of guarded caution and a spark of hope. In those words, she recognized a sincere desire to confront the past and mend the fractures that had defined their broken connection. "I've struggled to find peace in the aftermath," she replied, her voice resolute yet tender. "There were days when bitterness felt like a shield, but I've come to realize that clinging to pain only kept us both imprisoned in a cycle of regret." The conversation flowed naturally into a dialogue of openness that neither had dared hope for before. Memories surfaced unbidden, the long nights of doubt, shared laughter that had been eclipsed by the darker moments, and promises that had dissolved into the ether of miscommunication. Every painful recollection was met with a counterbalance of longing for a different outcome, a future where trust could be rebuilt from the charred ruins of the past. He stepped closer, the distance between them literally and metaphorically narrowing. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I need you to know that I'm willing to change, to be better than the person who let you down. I want to create new memories that aren't defined by the mistakes we made." The protagonist's eyes softened as she took in the sincerity in his tone. It was not a desperate plea for absolution, but a measured offer of redemption. She allowed herself a small nod, a quiet acceptance of the beginning of what might be healing, a bridging of two separate worlds once again. "I've spent so long trying to reclaim my strength, to find a past that wasn't dictated solely by hurt and betrayal. In facing these truths, I am reclaiming not just my power, but also my capacity to believe in change and redemption." Her words seemed to hang midair, a promise of new horizons, and in that suspended moment, the remnants of their shared past mingled with a cautious hope. The conversation had laid bare vulnerabilities that had once hidden in the dark crevices of denial. In the raw exposure of their innermost pains, both found a measure of forgiveness for themselves and each other. The turning point came unexpectedly, a gentle pause, as if the universe itself acknowledged the significance of this surrender to vulnerability. Slowly, deliberately, they leaned toward each other. It was not an impulsive or desperate motion, but the culmination of months of unspoken understanding and silent remorse. Their lips met in a tender, almost hesitant kiss that spoke not of immediate reconciliation, but of a promise of mutual healing. In that single soft moment, they found a semblance of truth and renewal. The kiss was a gesture that went beyond the physical. It signified the acknowledgement of their shared responsibility for the past, and a courageous step toward a new future grounded in honesty and respect. As they finally parted, there was a quiet clarity in both their expressions, a recognition that while the wounds of yesterday might never fully vanish, they could forge a path forward that was rooted in redeeming love and unwavering integrity. The ex-partner stood there, his eyes still searching hers for any sign of reservation, as she softly declared, "I'm choosing to embrace the truth that in our shared history, there were moments of beauty alongside the pain. I'm reclaiming my worth, not for either of us, but for myself, and if we are to walk together again, let it be with unspoken promises to nurture the trust we have so desperately yearned for. The ancient clock in the hall chimed softly, marking the passage of time, a reminder that healing was not instantaneous. Yet, in that fragile space between past transgressions and the hope of tomorrow, both recognized that this was a rebirth. They turned away from the familiar patterns of conflict into a realm where truth, redemption, and love could intertwine gracefully, setting a course that honored both their histories and their emerging hopes. In the ensuing quiet, as shadows lengthened into the embrace of the coming night, the protagonist felt a profound release. The unresolved arcs of their shared saga were finally acknowledged and delicately redrawn. The balance of truth and trust had been restored in the vulnerability of that fleeting kiss,